Join Jesus where he's already at work. We dream of the day where every home in America is adopted by one or more persons living the prayer, care, share lifestyle. Our host, Gary Kendall, began Love KC with the desire to see every home in Kansas City prayed for. Join with him to make this happen. Now, on to the Blessed Podcast.
Hey, well, welcome to the Blessed Podcast, where we join Jesus, where he's already at work, where we live, learn, work, and play. And we're excited that you've joined us, and encourage you to subscribe so that you see the next ones that come out, and to share so you can take the message we're relaying here and take it further. And we're so glad today to have Eric Swanson on. Eric, glad that you're our guest today. Welcome.
Thank you, Gary. Just a delight to be here on some of the calls.
Awesome. Well, we will tell in just a minute some of the many things that you do and let you share a little bit about your background. And we're excited to do that. I think there are people who are listening today specifically because you're on the podcast. So that's a good thing. I want to say welcome
or a bad thing, one or the other.
Yeah. Well, we can let them judge. And Brooke Powell, my co-host. Thank you, Brooke. Glad to have you on again.
Thanks. Yeah, it's great to be here. I'm excited to hear from Eric.
Yeah. So Eric, I'll go back to a story I've told you before, kind of just to start off the day, that back when you wrote the book To Transform a City, I had no idea who you were, of course. A friend gave me the book, and I think I was going somewhere. I think I was on a retreat or something like that. Started reading it, and it was just fascinating. And I kept reading it, and I kept thinking, these are things I believed, but I haven't heard anybody saying this. And I didn't even know if I was imagining them or if they could possibly happen. But I was just like, oh man, like it was a page turner for me, because I was thinking, oh, I so believe that this could happen in Kansas City. And I'd love to meet this guy sometime. I even started changing my schedule, Eric, to make 10% of my time. I said, if I believe in this, I've got to make room for it. So I started saying, I'm going to take 10% of my time every week to do citywide things. And in the beginning, that just looked like mostly trying to go to anything I could find that somebody else was doing, because I wasn't doing anything myself. But over time, as I got involved in a bunch of different networks and began to kind of understand how cities worked, I began to see more of what the lane might be for me. But thank you for To Transform a City. And I know that you've done more since that, but I just want to say I really, really, really appreciated the kick in the butt that got me moving into city work.
You know, it's funny, Gary, that you should say that, because, you know, where you say, you know, the biggest compliment I've got on this kind of some of the stuff I've written is, well, I really didn't learn anything new, because this is what God was already showing me. But you gave me some diagrams and some verbiage to explain myself. And I want to say that in all seriousness, because I think people moving from a little ministry to the idea of a city, or from going from a church, because you were a pastor of mega church for many, many years, but somehow you had a second conversion, probably one of many conversions, where all of a sudden the space where you saw God wanted to operate was way bigger than just a local church, although certainly he's using local churches. Right. But could there be something else? And he's put on people's hearts just that desire to be an agent in that transformation. And if he would be so gracious to give you a network of churches to lead and other leaders to lead. So I think, you know, one of the things, so a lot of this, you know, really comes out of, I kind of think sometimes when somebody like yourself and Brooke are involved in city transformation, you know, these people aren't sure what to think of you because they don't have a category. And I kind of think a city transformation is the result of the good news and Jesus, good news and good deeds of Jesus that results in spiritual and societal transformation. And my definition comes right out of Matthew 22, where Jesus was asked what the great commandment was. And he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and strength. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. And so we think that spiritual transformation is really nothing less than an increasing number of people in Kansas City learning to love their Lord, their God, with all their heart, their soul, their mind, their strength. That results in that spiritual transformation. That societal transformation is really the product of an increasing number of people found in churches, found in in every domain, every sector of society, learning to love their neighbors as themselves and manifesting that love. And so this isn't something that's peripheral to the mission of God. I think it's really central to the heart of God.
I agree.
And it really comes as a result of combining that good news with the good deeds that really describe Jesus' ministry. So I'm excited the journey you're on. I think when we first met face to face a couple of years ago, it's sort of like we kind of knew of each other,
right?
And then finally got to meet just through actually where we both work, and that's been a lot.
I ran into you in the hangar at Glue.
That's right. And then to be with you a couple of weeks ago and seeing the pastors you're bringing together all around the same thing of city transformation is just wonderful. Can I give a shout out to you too? I just today, unrelated to this, but I got your annual report. I think they're going to send to all those that are committed to seeing the kingdom come to Kansas City a little more than it is. And I think I wrote you a note right away saying, you're a quick learner. You've stolen from everybody that we admire.
Oh yeah, I know how to steal from people.
No, but I just thought it was brilliant. You've got to have language. So ideas are carried. Ideas and words are the buckets that thoughts are grasped in, and somehow to have the ability to create clear language, like even on your theory of change, which most city networks have a hard time describing. In a theory of change is we believe that if we do this, it'll lead to more of this, more of the flourishing that God desires. And when I read this morning, think about it, I'm reading your annual report. Do I need life or what? I'm reading your annual report. What am I doing that for? But it just captivated me. Our theory of change, to see transformation in a city as large as Kansas City, our path must be simple. Anyone can do it. Repeatable. The lift must be light enough that it can become a habit. It becomes a habit. Actionable. The result works to bring change. Sustainable. The habit becomes a lifestyle. And the last one, 5, scalable. The core process repeated continually reproduces itself. And then you add on to the strategy of loving your neighbor as you love yourself is simple, repeatable, actionable, sustainable, and scalable.
Yeah.
And so whether you already knew the solutions, then you built the problem to think the solution you already had. That's absolutely brilliant. Great. And so later today, I'm going to send out a letter to all the folks that are on our network, just kind of saying, and then you had the audacity to take your key question from our buddy Wes Lane down there.
I did.
But for the listening audience, I think people are asking, well, what difference would it make if we did gather? What can we do together that we can't do individually? And Gary's got this kind of big, hairy, audacious goal here under which he calls it the key question. But what evil should die and what good should thrive because God's people are living on mission? And I'll tell you, that just cuts to the chase.
Yeah, it does.
And by the way, that can be applied in everything. What if every ministry you launched in your church, every small group had that as their statement? Because this small group meets, what evil should die in our city or what good should thrive because this small group meets?
Right.
If you're just meeting for personal enrichment, really? I think that's kind of, are we to be a people on mission? And we're not talking, it doesn't need to be something drastic. Maybe there's one third grader that if not for this group, not for their involvement in after school program, would not be reading at third grade level, but now they are. Yeah. And that determines that's the most determinative thing about their future. Third grade reading levels are tied to high school graduation, to drug use, incarceration, the teen pregnancy, drug use. 93% of our people or 87% of our people that are in federal prisons are functionally illiterate, or just something like that. So it doesn't mean we're solving this big problem, but just, to make somebody's life better because this small group makes. Yeah. One, the city is better because this church exists. This men's.
It's a good litmus test for anything that we're doing. If that isn't true of what we're doing, maybe we shouldn't be doing it. If it doesn't bring that kind of change.
Well, we don't do we even have the rigor to think that way, Gary? In other words, no, honestly, the challenging question is always this, right?
Right.
That any use of resources, like our missions are so vague, we can't evaluate.
Yeah.
But what if we had a mission so specific, that any use of resource that did not actually go towards fulfilling that mission was a great waste of resources.
Right.
Rather than, well, we do a bunch of good in the city. Anyways. So
Eric,
I just want to give a shout out. Just love it. And by the way, love
thanks.
KC. Is a great name. I was back in Fort Wayne, and guess what? That they're just launching their city transformation movie, but guess what they're calling themselves?
Is that what Jerry's going to call it? Love Fort Wayne?
Love Fort Wayne.
I think Jerry's awesome. She's doing a really good work there.
Yeah, she is. And by the way, I mean, that name more than anything else just spoke to the leaders there, and they've got some pretty good group that's forming that group. But because it can translate to love all of our kids, love all of our schools, love, so many things.
Right.
And it's this probably the most powerful word in the English language. And then you attach it to KC.
Yeah, that's awesome. Eric, one of the things that
by the way, but your name is so good, you can say love KC barbecue, love KC.
Yes.
Royals, love KC.
That's true.
It's a flexible.
In fact, when I did the Google search on love KC, we had to use the extension net instead of com, because there was a dating site that was about finding someone you love in KC. So the love KC.
You're not far off the mark on that, right?
Used to be a dating site, right? One of the things that dawned on me, Eric, when I was just listening to the different calls, and I really appreciate the calls that you do for the city leaders. Jerry's actually followed up with me a couple of times since we met over at the ranch. But I was thinking, when we've had this idea, pray, care, share, for as long as Mission America, it goes, way back 20 plus years. But I was thinking, as we were working with individuals in Kansas City to help them live a pray, care, share lifestyle that would lead to disciples making disciples, that it works good for individuals, but I don't know that it dawned on me about the societal good of how the same thing applied across a city by churches, ministries, and networks could create such a societal good. But when we're loving, we're praying, caring, sharing as individuals, we change our communities and the places where we live, learn, work, and play. But when we do that across a whole city, then a whole city prays together. A whole city, if you apply caring, it looks more like compassion and justice expressed. If you apply sharing, it looks like some kind of cooperative evangelistic work that can reach across the city into all the different pockets of the city. And discipling can help a whole city to grow as disciples. So what we do as individuals is one thing, but it can be done. In fact, I would submit that it's the one thing we could all do together, because it's a lifestyle, not a program. So if you ask a pastor to do one more thing, their eyes are going to roll back in their head. But if you say, let's equip, train, and deploy your people to live on mission every day on their own, and they can do it as a lifestyle, the lift is not heavy at all. And in fact, it can employ, like in Kansas City, I would say there's probably 500,000 people who are followers of Jesus, who are almost all lay people. And many of them actually want more to do, and they want more meaning in their life. If we could teach them to live on mission every day, in a pray, care, share, simple lifestyle like that, they don't have to add more. They're already meeting with people. Just pray for the people. They're already praying, pray for the people they're meeting. And they're already caring. They're in relationships. Just be intentional in the way that you care. They're already talking. They're telling stories. So learn to tell your story. Learn to tell the story of Jesus. It isn't revolutionary in the way of it's going to add a bunch of things to do. It's revolutionary in the fact that it transforms what you already do. So that really kind of dawned on me in sitting through some of the sessions that I was with you and at the ranch.
Yeah, and I think the way you've got it down here, even with your theory of change, it's so simple anyone could do it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I get the bless every home thing like you do, but I've created a little physical map of my neighborhood. I don't know if you can see that.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, it's a little blurry, but I've got
I have seen those maps.
Yeah. So
Chris Cooper would be proud of you. Yeah.
You can't see. Maybe these people don't want their names known, but being very intentional, just like you say. So what you've done, you've reduced every city movement has to have something that defines them. What are they trying to multiply?
Right.
You know, so our friend Rob Kelly in Fort Charlotte, they're trying to multiply pastors that are involved in Fort Charlotte. It's one pastor asking another pastor to be part of this network. So they've got 325 churches. So when they mobilize something like Art of Neighboring, they'll get 100 of those 300 churches.
Right.
But then get another 100 for literacy, or another 100 for school adoption, or orphan care, you know, stuff like that. And you know, they raised millions during the pandemic. You know, all the great stories. But it's sort of like, what is the smallest action you want the least, not least significant, but at the smallest level, what action needs to happen? And if that's done at scale, it works. So KC, out of all the cities in North America, KC has more people praying for the neighbors than any other city.
Right.
But it doesn't seem like, how can we get everybody on board? Because somebody's saying, hey, I'm doing this, you can do it this. It's so easy. Just subscribe to blesseveryhome.com, and you can create a geo map of the neighbors you want to pray for, which I did in my little subdivision. And, you know, it's so easy. So all of a sudden the pastor is not really, is unburdened from running a campaign, because it's like ants building, like ants. If you ever had an ant farm.
Yes.
They don't know that they're building this most amazing structure. All they know is, all I'm doing is I'm just picking up this one pebble of sand and moving it over here.
Right.
And that's kind of what this is, right? A movement so simple, anybody can do it. And it doesn't need a lot of orchestration, because it's what we call these fractals that we want to scale. So, yeah.
Right.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah. Nobody's doing any really hard work, but the sum total is huge.
Wow.
Yeah. I love that, Eric. I will steal that too.
Oh, yeah. Of course. But, you know, but having a fifth of the population on mission.
Right.
You know, and just being aware of praying for a person, caring for that person, sharing with that person, discipling those people. And I know that you've done that, Garrett, in your neighborhood. And, you know, it's not overly complex. There's nothing to buy, nothing to read, really. You know,
probably, Eric, if we just mobilize the people who are our lay leaders living on mission, sociologists will say that even introverts have about 40 people in their circle of friends. And an extrovert might have 120, you know, but everybody has something between that's in their sphere of influence. And if all of us were living on mission, we probably already have every single person in the city within someone's sphere of influence, you know.
Wow.
Back to, what is it? The five
degrees of separation.
Degrees of separation. I think we reach our whole city overnight if we just learn to do this.
Yeah. If we could almost visualize it, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, obviously, do you ever get on LinkedIn?
Yes.
And you know, you haven't met this person, but all of a sudden you see you got 16 friends in common.
Right.
You know, it's like that. You're 1 degree of separation from, through this stranger, you're being reintroduced to your friends, you know, so, you know, it's crazy.
Absolutely.
Well,
so,
Eric,
before that compliment. Yeah. Go ahead, Brooke.
Yeah, Brooke.
Before we jump in, Eric, I know there's some of our viewers who are.
We haven't jumped in yet. I just give you my best stuff.
Yeah. I know there's more down in that well. So
Brooke has high expectations, Eric.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, I just wondered if you wanted to introduce yourself, give some background. How did you get to where you are today? Just, a little bit about who you are.
I love that you can see the Zoom call in your glasses, Brooke.
I know.
Great. It's awesome.
I'm trying to find some new ones that don't have such a glare.
Yeah, we can see the
well, at least, Gary, at least we know she's looking at the screen. She's not checking her social media feeds or anything like that.
Right?
Yeah, right. Answering her phone.
Yeah. So my background was just spiritual background. Really came to faith as a freshman in college at Cal Berkeley, and got some really good solid discipleship. A couple years after I graduated, back then you were facing Gary, I think you're a little young for this, but it was still Vietnam era, and I was facing the draft. So did what a lot of college students did, join the reserves. But a couple years after I graduated, really felt the call to go into vocational ministry. So was actually at a 25-year run with Campus Crusade for Christ, now called Cru. One of my sons has been on staff now for 17 years, most of those in China.
Wow.
And they came home during the pandemic. Now they're going to Turkey. But in that process, so Campus Crusade is an absolutely wonderful ministry. And but the format is a lot of sharing the gospel, which I did, and the best thing that ever happened to a person is knowing Christ personally. But it was also, as I got exposed, after I left staff, I went to work with an entrepreneur, but also started working with a group called Leadership Network, and got to meet a bunch of churches that were really thinking differently about what church ought to be. And they would say they were measuring their effectiveness not by how many people they could bring into the sanctuary on a Sunday morning or a weekend service, but by the transformational effect they were having on their community around them. And they became known as externally focused churches. And but it was something God was just doing. He was creating dissatisfaction with people that if church was just a mini seminary and a worship center, really, that's what it means to be on mission. And so a lot of stuff came out of that. And the city transformations kind of came out as a result of churches saying, hey, Gary, what are you guys doing at your church? Could we join you for that? And then Gary said, yeah, because this other church is going to join us too. And then 2 or 3 churches start doing it. And then 5 churches started doing it. And then 20 churches start doing it. And then all of a sudden, then schools say, hey, can we benefit from this? Could you come and help us? And so this was... So in 2003, I began convening, my friend Sam Williams and I, who wrote the book with me, Transform a City, began convening these city leaders from really all across the globe. And we'd go to different conferences. At the time, we had a pretty good budget, so we could go to these places, but we'd meet these amazing people. And we'd say, well, who are you learning from? And they say, as far as we know, we're the only ones that are doing it this way.
Yeah.
And so we met some people, brought some people from Norway, from Oslo, and from Berlin, and Beijing, China. We had one of the descendants of the last emperor of China, who was a business guy. Wow. And we had San Salvador, Mexico City, Mumbai, India, Auckland, New Zealand, and then a few cities in the U.S. And we met actually this group for 3 years. Twice a year for a week at a time, coming on Monday, leaving Friday. And a lot of just the sharing and experimentation that we're doing, we learn from each other. And Gary, you'd recognize if you've read the Transform a City, a lot of the stories came from that cross learning. And then people, gosh, we could try doing that too. And the criteria for bringing these people together is like if Billy Graham went to their city, who would that person be that he'd want to meet with, or share, man or woman that would be able to convene the other Christian leaders. Mm-hmm. And so we'd invite that person, then they could bring whoever they wanted to. Right. And it was a very robust learning situation of people. And, it's like Gary being in these things, but for the first time, they say, I guess I'm not as crazy as I thought I was.
Right.
And it's a little bit like sometimes if you remember the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, it was like all these people are moving towards the Devil's Tower in Wyoming, but they don't know why. So some people see it brought out, and remember when Richard Dreyfuss is bringing the mud from the garden and building this, this mud tower, but it's just kind of a God thing, and that maybe Sam and I were able to put some language around it, but certainly God was just kind of moving people from the church to the city. I did a survey a few years ago with church pastors I was working with, but I said one of the questions was. It was more like an agree question, but I find myself thinking about the city more than I do about my church. And a high percentage of pastors kind of made that shift. I find myself thinking more about the kingdom than I do about my little fiefdom. Right. And it's just a wave of history, and so it's kind of fun to be part of it.
Yeah.
I'm married.
You kind of messed up my career. You messed up my career path.
Thanks a lot. You said I messed it up, but you got a big old smile on your face. So it couldn't have been
right. In a good way, of course. No, I really started, two things happened, Eric, for me about the same time I read that book, I started going to China, and I went 17 times to visit our partners over in China. And
Wow.
I was just watching what was going on in the church there and comparing it to the church I was leading. And I love the church I was leading. I helped create it. I planted that church. But
Yeah, you can't
I
do
just
anything bad.
started.
Some of your old parishioners might be listening to Gary.
I know. I've said this, they've heard me say it before, but I would just see what was happening there, which is so much like Book of Acts. And I kept saying, this is like the Book of Acts. And then I thought, as I would hear stories from other parts of the world where there were similar kinds of movements happening, and where there was really city transformation, because everywhere the gospel goes, it transforms the cities.
Oh, yeah.
And so I just started thinking, wait a minute, this is, probably the biblical pattern. We have a Western version of it that isn't built around multiplication. It's kind of built around preservation. We build buildings and we preserve the program, we preserve what we've been doing, and we forget how to multiply and how to grow. And we stop living on mission as it relates to giving ourselves away, the kind of living sent kind of ideas. So it was this disruption that kept growing until I finally had to do something about it.
Oh, that's great. I was thinking, Gary, I haven't thought about this in quite a while, but I think I probably wrote about this in the book. But if you remember that illustration of in 1917, when the communists took over Russia, they didn't make Christianity illegal.
Mm-hmm.
But what they made it illegal to do is do any good works.
Yeah.
Because the state was going to do those.
Wow.
And so the church became impotent, powerless, irrelevant when they disassociated the good it could do in a city from the message it was preaching.
Wow.
And that's where you have, and so when the church in America does by default what Lenin did on purpose to disempower the church, it's no wonder that so many communities, the church is irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
I think the big win for this thing is what if there came a day when cities would be fighting to bring church planters into their city? If you read the latest Christian, and I'm saying that in all sincerity, because did you happen to read that article in Christianity?
I haven't read the latest, no.
But the latest was, let me just go pull it up just one sec. But the name of the article, again, hey, it's all blurry.
It's probably because of the blur.
Yeah, it is blur fact.
Right, on your
There's a
background.
part right there. But basically it says, empty pews are an American health crisis. And what he was saying was, and think about it, and I think, Gary, we need to kind of start thinking about this way, but we all know so many people that say, yeah, my marriage was really on the rocks, but there was this church. Or I grew up in a bad part of town, involved in gangs, but there was this pastor.
Mm-hmm.
There was this coach who was on staff at this church. And you create a different future by the church being there, just being present and creating an alternative for people it's think of all the stories we've heard where that happens. So when you take the church out of the equation, do we end up with cities much more like Pottersville than Bedford Falls? If you think of It's a Wonderful Life, that what is a city? If you go back earlier to a non-canonical gospel or letter, epistle, called the Letter of Mathetus to Diognetus, but he talks about Christians of the second century, but he introduces this phrase. He says, as the soul is to the body, so Christians are to the world.
Wow.
So if you take the soul out of a body, you have nothing but a corpse. He's basically saying, if you take believers, if we decide we're just going to live in our little holy huddles and separate ourselves from this evil city, it'll make it evil.
Yeah.
It's conscience. It's a soul. And if you take the city out, no wonder many cities are on the way down is because the soul has been taken out or they've taken themselves out. Yeah. I think it's so easy to blame. Oh, we're not persecuted. You go to China. You go to China. Right. You find out. Right. I was over at a Three South church right across in Shenzhen, and they had the. It was really interesting. They have a bunch of English speaking visitors right across the street from Hong Kong. But these guys, all the pastors, they were not compromised people. They were just so glad to be released from prison, to be back in their pulpits. They didn't care that they cut out all the hymns that had to do with the second coming or with, you know what I mean? Because we had the English, so they had these mimeograph things, but they had cut out all,
right, right.
There wasn't any hymn 259 there. That was gone. But they paid the price to share the gospel. Right. You hear about these cities where, the public sewage is bad. They just all outhouses are just people, doing their business everywhere. Yeah. And at night, the believers would come and clean up the city. Yeah. And just anonymously, and all of a sudden, well, who are these people that are making our place a better place? And, right. and revival, and yeah. Who I don't know anybody in the U.S. that's done that.
Who does that?
But we're under such horrible persecution. And I'm not saying we can be diminished, but I think a lot of it we bring it on ourselves.
I've told this story quite often, Eric, but I quit saying this after a while, but for a while I would say to people, because I've had people who had been in prison, I'm praying for you because you have persecution. And they would always say the same thing. Oh, we pray for you because you don't. That was their answer back all the time. And then they would, like if Chinese people, they're really straightforward, blunt, sometimes even what we might say offensive in the U.S. They'll just tell you that whatever they're thinking, they'll say it and they'll go, you know what? Seems like the church in America is asleep and, not sure what it's going to take to wake it up. And I think of how if we just go to worship services, we just listen to preaching, that's all we do. It all becomes about us. And pretty soon we just don't have much of a testimony or much vitality. But all you have to do is get around people who are working with people who are lost and people are finding Jesus. Their lives are turning around. Their lives are changing. Transformation by the Holy Spirit's happening. And they're the most joyful people you ever met. I went to a conference a week ago where I was there just representing Glue at this conference, standing at a table, lots of people walking by, lots of church kinds of people who were at tables like me. And there was this one table that was like super active, lots of fun, lots of laughter, lots of people. Of course, no one was coming by my table. So I went over to their table to see what this was all about. And it was a group that basically had a Celebrate Recovery program. They had a different name for it, but they were doing Celebrate Recovery as a part of their program. And they actually had even progressed to the place where they had in-house lodging for people who were either coming off of an addiction or coming out of jail. They worked with both groups of people. Wow. So much joy, so much laughter, so many smiles, like the radiant people saying, 3 years ago, I was a drug addict. Now I'm free and I'm helping others get free. Or one guy was in jail and now he was there. He was the representing the house where the men lived. And that was where the party was, in the room where all the joy was, because they were living on mission.
Okay, it's 2 questions. This can be offline.
Okay.
What conference was it and why wasn't I invited? That's offline. I want to know the answer why you're having such a good time and I'm... Actually, I would be interested what event that was, but tell me later. Okay. Yeah, no, that sounds good. So I do think we are in a place. So Gary, you've been on this journey. We've been hanging out with this about a year and a half. Mm-hmm. I came to Esses and all the city leaders, stuff like that. But it's a growing type of thing. I was on with Lisa this morning. There was a woman that
Lisa Matthews.
Yeah, she just read one of my things. I wrote a book called with Rick Russo called The Externally Focused Quest. Did a rewrite on it during the pandemic, and it's got some gems in it.
Yeah.
I don't know if you read it or not, but it's
Remember,
really,
I bought a whole box of them from you and gave them away in Kansas City. Remember?
why? How could I forget? You really did?
I really did. I sent your wife a check for several $100s.
No, this is lies. This is just a bunch of lies here. This has never happened. Anyways, but she's got that she's got the tap of God in her life. So Lisa and I met with her for about an hour this morning, and she just kind of feels the same thing. I read this stuff, and it's what I've just been thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing more exciting to be involved in than responding to what. Many people would love to have that. And I don't know why God gives that person a flame to do something, and others, they're waiting for it, but it doesn't come, or they're not listening or something. But she was just so excited, and just having what Jerry's doing in Fort Wayne, and then there's others with like Marco in
St. Louis.
He's in St. Louis, just having time of his life, and Jed, George Jed's doing a great job in Omaha. But you have all these people that are just sort of like, I come out of business, but I just got to do this thing. It's that crazy close encounters.
Yeah.
We need to have a new phrase for it. Close encounters of the first kind,
Yes, of the first kind.
Meeting with God on the mountain like Moses. So
right. I did like that illustration you used. I remember the movie. So one thing, I was just to piggyback off what you just said, I really think that there's the majority of followers of Jesus probably feel under-challenged in terms of the way they're being asked to live on mission.
Yeah.
And when we see the number of lights that are growing in Kansas City, there's 3,200 now. It's growing at over 60 a month consistently for 4 years now. And that number comes because friends are telling friends. It isn't because I'm out campaigning all the time. I do, but I'm not that good, and I can't go that often. It's friends telling friends. So friends are saying, I am learning to live a pray, care, share lifestyle by living on mission, where I live, learn, work, and play. And I am seeing Christ at work. I see his fingerprints on things I'm doing, and I want more of it. And now I'm telling my friends, hey, you can do this too. And it's multiplying and growing. And it leads me to believe that if we could get the message to the rest of the, other 70% of the under-challenged laity, that this thing could turn around.
I think that's, you can't go to second base till you cross first base. And I think this is a good first base.
Yeah.
Right. Get enough of these people. I'm maybe switching over to Rick Warren's metaphor, but I'm just saying,
sure.
This meets that criteria of like what Dave Rudney talks about. It's a bar so low, it's an embarrassment not to step over it.
Right.
It's so easy. They give you the prayers to pray for your neighbors.
Yeah.
just
right.
Read after me, right?
Right.
So, and by the way, that's kind of the genius of it, and it kind of fits your change model there. It's not like who's really committed, who can really man up for this big job in Kansas City, who's woman enough. No, it doesn't appeal to the macho in anybody. It's sort of like, can you spend a minute every day or two praying for your neighbors?
Yep. And
then looking for opportunities to care for them in tangible ways, and then being open to looking for that God moment in the conversation, So it's just
Absolutely.
Not that. It's sort of like the irreducible minimum, I think.
Yep.
And if you discover that most people can do that. And by the way, this is where, if you read any BJ Fogg stuff, Tiny Habits, he just has this great, I guess we're not all visual here, but if you figure out a diagram, he says behaviors, the product of three things. It's I got to think of it. It's motivation plus ability plus a trigger all at the same time. So what I mean by that is that, so he says, it's like if you going to a conference or something like that, and people come back from a conference, oh man, I wish I was on that conference high. I wish I I made a commitment to read the Bible. Now I can't even find my Bible. I wish I had that same feeling. And so when you're highly motivated, you can do some very difficult things. But what happens when you have no motivation?
Right.
And he says, now there is a little bar that you have to be at least a tiny bit motivated. And there's some things that no matter how motivated you are, like Gary, we said, man, it'd be so glory to God if you could run a marathon tomorrow. Just show the world you can do it, Gary. You can do it, buddy. You can do it.
You wouldn't be able to move for a week.
It's not a matter of motivation. It's all about ability.
Right.
And so you have to make things so easy that even when a person has very, very little motivation, they can still do it. And I think that's what prayer, care, share is.
Yeah.
Is that even when you're feeling, I don't feel close to God. I don't feel particularly spiritual today. But as I'm going through my emails, it pops up. I'm willing to read this prayer.
Yeah.
And who knows what God might do to use that. So I think it's a great strategy.
Hey, Eric, before we run out of time today, would you give a little bit of a tribute to Ray Bakke and talk about, his theology of a city and how God works in cities? Because to me, that was fascinating. I attended a whole lot of the sessions you did with Ray. And I just wish, I had learned about Ray years ago. But talk a little bit about Ray and give tribute to him, and then a little bit about his theology of how God works in a city.
Yeah. So Ray was an unintended mentor of mine, that just a gift from God that God gave me. I ran into him at a CCDA conference, Christian Community Development Association. And at the time when I was working with Leadership Network, I could buy any book I wanted to, but I had to write a book report if I wanted to reimburse it. Ray says, hey, why don't you attach a degree to what you're doing? You're learning so much. Why don't you attach a degree to it? So that's what I started on a DMin program with Ray, and really traveled all over the world with him. I've been to Italy and to Ireland and to China and in many U.S. cities, Chicago, New York, and all this kind of stuff. And I kind of majored in Ray. And Ray's journey was that he said, that it was kind of the idea that God was opposed to cities, and God loved the shepherds of the world and those things. And so when he moved into Chicago, he was an inner city pastor. He determined to live on a public aid salary, be paid no more than what people that were on public aid were making, send his kids to the schools there. But they're public schools, just like everybody else. He was there for 35 years in Chicago. Wow. And Ray started studying, and he found out that there were over 1,200 verses on the city in the Bible, and nobody had ever done that before. Mm-hmm. And he just found out that in the smallest self-organizing system, or the largest self-organizing system, is a city. Everything else man-made, counties, state lines, countries, and all that kind of stuff. But the largest self-organizing entity is a city. And just about how God loves cities. So one of the things that Ray did that all of you guys have done is when he moved into Chicago, he said he just started visiting pastors and just asking. He said, I passed by your church, but I just want to thank you for your work you've done. And listen to their stories. And Ray says that, so he did that with pastors. He did it with the police and the fire department. He did this with business leaders and all that kind of stuff. He said, if you do that, he said, you're going to know more about your city than any other person alive, just from a listening tour. And that's when I say anybody that's interested in starting a city movement, the first thing they have to do is really, I think, interview 50 leaders. And it could be just as simple as our friends down in Richmond did, Matt and Anna Shank. They just had two questions. They said, what's beautiful about Richmond and what's broken about Richmond? Mm-hmm. And with 50 leaders, and then now they have a movement of 197 churches, just because starting from, they probably asked all these people the same questions. But just by asking that, and Lisa Matthews this morning when we were on the call with that woman from Madison, Lisa came up with this brilliant statement. She said, unless you listen to the city will never listen to you.
Wow. Oh, wow. That's great.
Isn't that great? So, but if you take your time, start off with listening and just having that conversation. I think a third question I'd add to what the Shanks had, maybe the Shanks already had it, but if you could wave a magic wand and wake up tomorrow, something would be different in our city, what would it be? Wow. So I think what's beautiful, what's broken, and then what's your vision of a changed city? If you do that with 50 people, you'll kind of see where you need to start, I've also kind of said for people that are starting city movements, I think 3 full qualifications are your interviews with 50 leaders. Then you have to have because that shows the leaders want to meet with you. You can have a heart for it, but it's kind of like you have to have something that of interest that at least have a cup of coffee with you.
Right.
And you can play a supportive role, but you probably can't leave a city movement if you can't convene, if you can't get a leader to meet with you. The second thing is, can you synthesize that information to make sense of it? And that takes work. You know what Lisa did with her after she interviewed 50 city leaders.
Yeah.
She spent hours putting together a good, but that report was a gold. You know?
Oh, it is. It's great.
And then the way you start was that then just convene those people you interviewed around what you learned and tell them to bring their friends. You know?
Right. Right. That's wonderful.
So that's where, so Ray kind of gave us that gift of this listening tour. And he's contracted, he lost his wife about 3 months ago. And at the same time, Ray had contracted cancer. The chemo wasn't working, so he got off cancer. But my wife and I were just talking today. He's until the day he dies, he will be vital. I listened to his sermon he gave on Reformation Sunday, October 31st.
Wow.
Dressed up in full regalia like Luther, talking about the importance of Luther. Still doing that. In fact, I should send that out in our letter. I'll send out tonight.
Yeah.
It was just so good and just a life well lived. You end up writing a number of books. The two most influential are A Theology as Big as the City. And for anybody that's interested in city work, it's kind of 101. I also gave to Gary and others. I went through Ray. He had kind of 10 foundational lectures, each about a half hour each. And you know how you can get the transcription off of YouTube, but then put in links to the books he recommended and pictures of the place he'd been. And if you're interested in city ministry, man, that's a great place to begin. Just for those 10 foundational lectures, takes you about 30 minutes each. So what is that? 5 hours. But that would be kind of 101. Second book was The Urban Christian he wrote. And that was, again, very influential for people. And so we kind of say anybody that's kind of venturing in this world, start there. Read Theology as Big as the City, Urban Christian, watch Ray's 10 things. And as he passes, I don't think he has any idea of the impact that he's had on so many of us, and then through us on so many others. But I just give a prayerful and very grateful privilege for the intersection that I had with Ray Bakke.
Oh man. Yeah. So I was hanging on every word in those sessions. Yeah. I couldn't write down enough notes. He just, things roll off his tongue, you know, like they just came out of a book, and it's just amazing.
Yeah. You know, he would do that. I asked him one time how he learned, why does he know all these books? Like he'll say, well, actually, let me recommend 4 books for you. And he'll, you know, and he had a library about 6,000 books. He lives in a little townhouse right now during these last days of the caregiver. But his brother was actually a guy named Dennis Bakke, a billionaire really, who did really well in the energy business. Very talented family. But Ray had a library of about 6,000 books. So he said, every day I just go down a shelf of my books and I open them up, read the title, read the table of contents, flip through them to remind myself of the content and put it back. And the next book. I mean, can you imagine the discipline of even doing that, Gary?
Oh man, I can't. No.
But then he becomes so resourceful to us. Yeah. And he can name dates. He can name name recommended books. He can, you know, remembering all these people. So
his memory is so sharp.
Yeah. Even now with cancer and all that kind of stuff is the old man. What does that scripture say? That, you know, that even though the outer man is decaying, the inner man is being renewed day by day. Yeah. And he is so full of life, even at this point in his life, you know, with maybe a very short time span to live, still vibrant.
Hey, talk a little bit about 14 Fridays.
14 Fridays. Gare, I can't believe you asked me about that. So the last 4 years so with Leadership Network, worked with really some of the largest, most influential churches in the country on the topic of how data analytics and messaging can really help do the 5 things every church has to do really, really well to thrive and grow. And those 5 things are, they have to figure out how to track people. That is simply making people aware that their church exists. Secondly, they have to get people in the door the first time to an event or a service. I mean, it's one-on-one church, right?
Right.
Third, they have to figure out how to keep people. And so every growing church has more people coming in the front door than leaving the back door. And this, obviously, the pandemic's been a real crisis in this area. And then, but it's so interesting, like even that 60% of people that come to a church 3 times will make it to the church home. That's a good little piece of data to know. The fourth thing is, how do you grow people? Every church has a growth model, which is a theory of growth, which is that we believe that people do this or this plus this or this plus this for this to become a disciple. Right. So North Point Church, one of the churches that I worked with there, Andy Stanley's church, they said their growth model is there's 3 growth activities besides coming to church, but being in a small group, giving and serving. And they'll say if people are involved in 2 or more of those growth activities, they have a 97% retention a year later. Right. If they're involved in only one of them, the highest is about 53%. So if we just get people in small groups, another friend down in Arizona, they call it their +1 strategy, that they put everyone that's on the growing track, they're attending the weekend service and then involved in one of the just one growth activity of give, serve, or being in a small group. The last thing, which is most important, is multiply. So you have attract, get, keep, grow, and multiply. And multiply is qualitatively different than the first 4 in that these are people that are actually multiplying they moved from consumers to contributors because they're contributing and they're multiplying the mission of the church. They've moved from just being a mere consumer of the mission to actually, I'm on mission with my church. And that expresses themselves through giving more than $500 a year. So generous will say that a third of the people give nothing to your church, a third give between $1 and $4.99. But church budgets are sustained by people that give over $500 a year. But through serving internally in the church or externally in the community, through leading a small group or a ministry, through inviting people, through evangelizing, through discipling, through mentoring. And so it's really possible. So how to move those people on a track, get, keep, grow, and multiply. But how can we use data and that data is simply the information we need to make better ministry decisions. But how can we use those 5 things? So it's a novel form in a brief story. Here's how it goes. So every story is a person who has a problem, who meets a guide, who offers a solution that leads to life and avoids kind of bad things. So the story is about a pastor from Houston, and planned a church, grew it to about 2,000 in 12 years, got the attention of the denomination, was asked to help with church planting, which he did for another 10 years, very successful in that. Then he's asked to move up to Denver to help turn around a church, one of their flagship churches where the founding pastor died. And he's been at the job, and his wife was from Boulder. And so he said, yeah, I think I'd like to do that. But the problem is he's 6 months in the job, and everything that worked down in the Southeast doesn't work in Denver, up in the West. And so the opening chapter is and not only that, but the lead elder for the first 4 months, they were best buddies. I finally got a friend. So he opens up about some of his struggles, and the elder's very sympathetic. So they meet every week for the first 4 months, and they double date, but he hadn't spoken to him in 2 months.
Right.
So he knows something's up. So in the opening chapter, basically, he's told, you're not the guy. And his wife's not that keen on him being pastor anyway, because they don't really like her. And, so they got some marital conflict too. But he calls his dad on the way home from that, because he said, I never quit anything. I'm not quitting this. I'll figure it out. So he calls his dad and he says, well, what else do I do, Dad? The only thing I've ever known is pastoring. What I'm going to do, 53 years old, sell insurance. And so his dad says, well, when I was running the business, we had this consultant. He's a data guy, and he lives out in Denver. Let me see what I can do. So he goes home and cries in his beer with his wife. But that week in the mail, he gets a package of tickets to 14 all Friday night games from the Colorado Rockies 2019 season. And he lived a couple of blocks from Coors Field. So he goes down there, and who does he find himself sitting next to is the guide, Bob. Yeah. And so it follows their journey every Friday night. And then between each of the games, because they're not, obviously, sometimes it's 2 or 3 weeks before they have another Friday night game, he's doing what you can only do in times of uncertainty. And that is just creating hypothesis around a track, keep growing, multiply, and then running experiments.
Hmm.
By the way, did you get that case of books I sent you, Gary?
I do have that case of books. My
Yeah.
wife is sending them out to everybody who went to the KC Accelerator.
Yeah.
She has to find their home address before she can send it.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's what the book follows. Aristotle said a story gives the reader not what they expect, but what they want. It's just got a few twists and turns. But Gary, you've read it. I mean, you want to give a little
Yeah, I
endorsement?
loved it. So I read it on the airplane. I took 30 different trips this year, and I would keep it with me in my backpack. And every time I'd get on the plane, I'd start reading till the button beeped at 10,000 feet where you could get your computer out and work, and then I'd work. And then when that'd beep again, I'd put my computer away and read. And that was fascinating. I told you, Eric, I read even through the glossary. I read every word in the glossary.
Glossary is good.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's its own little chapter there. But yeah, the thing that I resonated with was understanding that, and I can say this after being a pastor for 40 years. Pastors too often depend on anecdotal stories, whatever someone tells them over a cup of coffee, or, as they leave the lobby at the end of the day, or the few data points that they might collect, which would be attendance, giving, how many are in groups, et cetera, et cetera. But many times it's very insufficient to diagnose what's really going on. And there's not enough use of data or the use of even trying things for a time. Like we're going to experiment, and whatever you want to call it, we're going to have a trial balloon or whatever you want to name it. But the churches tend to adopt a program and then they never want to change it. Even if it's failing, they just try harder. And I thought it was fascinating. I was challenged in many ways. I laughed out loud at some of the stories and enjoyed the ball games. And yeah, it was good.
Oh, you're very kind. But it is, it may not win any Pulitzer Prizes, but if you want to learn about that world in the context of what somebody says, that fiction is the lie you tell in order to tell the truth. And so it's a fictional book, but it's a right-brained emotional book that contains left-brained content.
Yeah.
And every good story, the whole purpose of the story is always about the change, the transformation that happens in the protagonist.
Right.
And the plot are the events that bring about that change. And that's kind of how you've tried to write it like that. Yeah. So Matt and I, we're proud of it. And we would love to see it get more legs. People write some more reviews on Amazon and all that kind of stuff. But by the way, Garrett, did you write one yet?
I did not write it. I did not.
That's how you could, yeah.
That's my assignment, right?
That's your assignment. Yeah, that's your payback for being on your podcast here. Hey, I think we've gone way over time. These people are these people could drone on forever because we're listening. All we're doing is listening to a conversation between two friends. This is totally boring and killing me. So I'm not going to say anything else. I'm through. But buy 14 Fridays available on Amazon.
Brooke, what were you going to say?
This has been great. I've just been like a fly on the wall, just taking everything in. So this has been awesome.
Eric, thanks so much. Every time I'm around you, I laugh and have a good time and learn something. So I'll check every box this time. Really appreciate your life and ministry and love working with you at Glue, and look forward to what God has in the future as we learn how to lead our cities to the fullness of life that God has for us. Brooke, thanks for your work at Love KC. You're a great coworker. Love what you do. Love your energy, your passion, and the way that you show up over and over again on behalf of other people. Thank you for that. For those of you who are listening, you can share this on Love KC on the Facebook page or Facebook group. You can also subscribe at iTunes or Google Play and share from there. And let's keep looking for the fingerprints of God everywhere we live, learn, work, and play. Have a great day. Thanks for joining.
Thank you so much for both of you.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you for listening from the folks at Love KC. We hope you enjoyed our program. See you next time.